What I experienced in the summer of 2012 is something that has changed my life forever. When I was 17, I spent my last summer living in my quiet town in Nova Scotia, right on the Mirror River. It was the kind of place where nothing ever happened, and while I loved living there, the lack of career opportunities meant that I would have to move elsewhere once I finished up high school. That August, I would be heading to Toronto to begin college on a scholarship. I remember that it was a Friday, and I had skipped school that day so I could help my dad set up the backyard for a barbecue we were going to have in the evening. While setting up some tables, I spotted a large black bag in the river, which ran behind our house. It was half submerged, caught against some branches near the bank. When I got closer, I saw that it was a hockey equipment bag, which struck me as odd. No one just throws away a perfectly good hockey bag around here. So I told my dad about it, and when he saw it for himself, he went to go grab a pike pole in the garage. When he came back out, we dragged it onto the shore. It was much heavier than expected. When we finally unhooked it, I noticed a horrible stench, the kind that makes your stomach turn instantly. At first, I thought perhaps someone had hit a dog on the road, stuffed it into this bag, and threw it into the river, which would have been horrible enough on its own. But curiosity got the better of us, and my dad unzipped the top just a few inches to see what was inside. We could see what looked like black plastic and hair. Human hair. My dad immediately zipped it back up, told me to go back inside and call the police. What the police discovered inside the bag would shock our entire community. The bag contained the remains of a 21-year-old woman named Laura Jessam. The case made national headlines. Since this was over 10 years ago, I'll be sure to provide some links to a couple of articles. Laura Jessam was strangled to death inside of an apartment in Glace Bay, where she had been doing drugs with 3 men, Morgan McNeil, Thomas Barrett, and Robert Matheson, who were charged in connection with the murder. There seems to be several versions of what exactly took place inside that apartment, mainly due to the suspects turning on each other. What is known for sure is that Jessam arrived there that day to do drugs. An altercation occurred at some point, and she was strangled to death, and her body was stuffed into a bag and dumped in the Mirror River. My dad and I were the ones who eventually discovered that hockey bag she was placed in and informed the police right away. Even now, more than a decade later, I still won't fish, swim, or even go near that stretch of river whenever I go visit my parents. Some places just feel permanently stained. In your last video, you had a story that took place in Peru, and it reminded me of my experience in the neighboring country of Ecuador. In the early 2000s, I had just gotten my degree, and I was looking to take a vacation before I started job hunting. My idea of a good time is seclusion. To this day, I'm an avid hiker who enjoys traveling to remote locations in the United States, Canada, and South America. A friend of mine suggested that Ecuador had some scenic hiking trails and that tourism there is extremely low because of the country's severe instability. I never minded a little danger, and the less tourists, the better. They always ruin the atmosphere for me. Despite how Caucasian-sounding my name is, I'm actually half Mexican on my mother's side, and I speak fluent Spanish. The point being, I could blend in easily. A day after landing in Guayaquil, I was deep in the Cerro Blanco forest, miles from anywhere. The canopy was so thick, it felt like evening time, despite it being in the middle of the day. I came to this location specifically to capture a photo of what they call the cloud forest, where trees become shrouded by low-hanging clouds, which creates a sort of localized fog area. But during my hike, I came across something very out of place. A white box truck, parked right in the middle of the forest. There was no road, no clearing, just trees all around it. I thought maybe the truck had broken down and was abandoned, but the truck looked like it was in good shape. I found it odd, but I wasn't looking for trouble, so I kept moving. That's when the first arrow flew right past my head, missing me by inches. Before I could even process what was happening, another arrow struck me in the shoulder. The pain was instant and burning. I ran as more arrows were shot in my direction. I came upon an area of tall bushes and dropped to the ground behind one of them, trying to make myself as small as possible. While I was hiding there, bleeding and trying not to make a sound, I saw a camouflaged figure emerge from the trees about 30 yards away, holding a crossbow. He moved slowly, scanning the area. He was clearly hunting for me. After what felt like forever, he finally disappeared back into the foliage. I soon heard the box truck start up and drive away. I stayed hidden for another 30 minutes. I knew not to remove the arrow, but I was still losing blood, and I had to get moving. I made my way back toward the parking area as fast as I could. When I finally reached the lot, I was exhausted and collapsed. Fortunately for me, several bystanders were there to help me. The police were called, and I was rushed to a hospital. A detective later came to speak with me when I was feeling better. He told me the box truck I saw was almost certainly being used by drug traffickers. The deep canopy of the Ecuadorian forests made perfect mobile staging points for moving narcotics. The man who shot me was probably guarding that shipment. It was in a remote location, but since it was near a hiking trail, the attacker may not have wanted to make too much noise, which is likely why they used a crossbow. I eventually made a full recovery and returned home as soon as I was able to. This happened in 2002. Since then, Ecuador has made a lot of progress and is a much safer place to visit now, but I have never returned there after that. There were a few articles written about what happened to me, but I can't seem to find any of them on Google. Over 20 years have passed, and I still go hiking whenever I can, and I always bring a handgun with me, if where I'm going allows it. It was around 2005 that I had to take a long hiatus, because that's when I met my wife and started a family. It wasn't until around 2018 that I started taking sporadic trips again. There was a while where I'd find myself looking at photos of my wife and kids, and a haunting thought would creep into the back of my mind. If that arrow had just been a few inches more to the left, I never would have met my wife, and my kids would have never been born. I likely would have disappeared forever. I'm submitting this story under a pen name because it's part of a book I'm currently writing that examines cults and fringe groups that have operated in the northeastern United States over the past several decades. What ultimately inspired me to pursue this project was a disturbing personal encounter I experienced back in 1996. If you can, please get a female narrator to read this. Okay, let's see what Josie is up to. She's probably sick of me asking her.
This happened right after my divorce. It was a very rough time in my life. I was exhausted, stressed out, and needed to get away from everything. I rented out a small cabin deep in the forests of Vermont so I could work on my first novel, Solitude. I had never been to Vermont before this. I'm from the West Coast. I chose it randomly because at the time, I was so paranoid that my ex-husband would follow me. Things did not end amicably between us. So, I reasoned that Vermont would be the last place he'd ever go looking for me. The cabin was beautiful, surrounded by thick forests with no neighbors for miles. At first, it felt like exactly what I needed. But after a couple of days, I started hearing strange noises at night, scratching sounds on the roof, footsteps on the front porch, and I thought I even heard voices whispering outside at one point. Given what I was going through at the time, this set me on edge. It wasn't just at night either. When I would go outside during the day, I got this overwhelming feeling that someone was watching me. I told myself it was just my paranoia from the divorce, and I wasn't exactly used to being alone in the woods. This went on for a few more days. I never encountered anyone though, so I just figured that perhaps my mind was playing tricks on me. One night, I woke up to a loud banging on my bedroom window. There was no way to rationalize it this time. There was someone outside the cabin. I sat up, heart racing, and looked to the window, which had the curtain drawn. Another loud pounding came, causing me to jump. Who's there? Do you have any idea what time it is? No one answered. After maybe 5 minutes of hearing nothing, I peeked out the window. The woods were dark and still. There was no one in sight. The thought had occurred to me that I experienced some kind of night terror, but just to be sure, I grabbed a flashlight and made my way out to the front door. Once I saw that there was no one on the front porch, I opened it carefully, then shined the light into the yard. That's when I saw them. There were maybe 10 men total, standing silently in the front yard and among the trees. All of them were wearing black hoods that covered their faces. In fact, that was the only thing any of them were wearing. They just stood there, like nude statues staring at the cabin. I'm not sure if I screamed or yelled at them, but it wasn't long after they all began to pleasure themselves. I was disgusted beyond words, but then I suddenly became more terrified than I had ever been in my whole life. Those freaks outside could easily force their way into the cabin. I was alone and defenseless. I slammed the door and locked it, then immediately retreated to the bedroom. I pushed a wooden wardrobe in front of the window before praying to God that the landline next to the bed was still working. Thankfully, it was, but I was shaking so badly I could barely dial 911. By the time the officers arrived 15 minutes later, the men were gone. The police took my statement and told me something that made my blood run cold. They had apparently received several reports from other women in the area who had either rented cabins like me or lived in remote locations. It was the same thing. Several naked men wearing black hoods, standing in the nearby woods. The officer told me that he was only aware of one other instance where someone witnessed them masturbating. The police were never able to catch them. They took the reports seriously, but it was unpredictable where they would show up next, even with increased patrols. They theorized this was some kind of bizarre cult ritual. They would make sure the women were alone, possibly scouting locations before they moved in, although they never seemed to attack or break in. It was like they wanted to make sure the women saw them. Most of the time, things wouldn't go according to plan. The women either wouldn't answer the door or a neighbor would see them and start yelling. Either way, the men would disappear back into the forest before the police could arrive. I left the cabin the next morning and never went back, and spent my remaining time in Vermont in a hotel room in Burlington. After this incident, I've done extensive research into this topic over the years. Vermont is a very small rural state, and it does have a history of cult activity. There's also a local urban legend dubbed the Men in Suits. During the 90s, there were numerous reports emerging from isolated areas describing well-dressed men appearing in locations where they clearly did not belong. I guess you could title my experience the Men in Birthday Suits. As I mentioned at the beginning, I do plan on getting the full story published someday, but in the meantime, I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts.